Meet the meQuanics is now sponsored by Audible.com. As part of this sponsorship, Audible is offering a free audiobook download with a 30-day trial so you can check out the range of titles that they're offering. Currently, Audible has over 180,000 books to choose from for either your iPhone, Android, Kindle, or MP3 player. To help support this podcast, please go to www.audibletrial.com/meQuanics. And now, on with our next episode.
Well, hello everyone. Thank you again for joining me for this next episode of Meet the meQuanics. This is an offline episode, so this will be uploaded to YouTube and uploaded to our various accounts on SoundCloud and iTunes for you to download later. I'm very happy to have Andrew Fursman, who is the CEO and co-founder of OneQubit in Canada. So Andrew, thanks for joining us today and having a bit of a chat.
Hey, thank you very much for having me.
So you're the second one that we've had from this sort of private sector startup spin-off kind of environment. You're not part of the big boys, the Googles and the IBMs who have put some investment into quantum computing. You've really come into this as sort of a separate company, pretty much from what I can tell, marketing itself as sort of quantum software. So maybe if you can give us sort of a bit of a background to OneQubit and what you guys are hoping to do in this space.
Absolutely. Well, you got it dead on. We are a software company in that we have no interest and no expertise in building quantum hardware. But I think what we really recognized was that there were a number of the types of organizations that you alluded to previously, in addition to some university research labs and also government organizations that have been pursuing a number of different types of quantum computing over the last few years. And we basically got ourselves to a point where we bought into the idea that quantum hardware was going to be something that was exciting and that was going to be available certainly within our lifetimes and much sooner than most people, I think, were prognosticating back a couple of years ago. And so basically we had totally gotten on board with the idea of near-term quantum computers evolving into the sort of full thing that we are all been looking for, the gate model style machines, within a reasonable time frame. But we also recognized after having a number of conversations with people in industry that nobody was really that interested in quantum computers, meaning that it's not as though there's this huge group of people out there who are waiting with bated breath for quantum computers to exist and that really want to go buy quantum computers, mostly because quantum computers aren't the thing that people want. What they want is for their problems to go away. Mm-hmm. And there wasn't a very clear understanding of how to connect quantum computers to some of the real world industry problems that were out there. And so we saw that as a real opportunity to be able to go and explore exactly how the strengths of both the near-term adiabatic quantum computers, the kind of mid-range general purpose analog machines, and the kind of holy grail longer-term gate model systems, how the capabilities of those machines would actually lend themselves to solving the types of problems that people in industry were facing, and to get a better understanding of both those problems and how they could be solved with quantum computers. And that was really sort of our impetus and the angle that we've been taking toward the industry.
So, I mean, when you guys got in, so when was OneQubit founded?
Right, so we were founded sort of in our minds at the very end of 2012, although we formally incorporated early in 2013.
Mm-hmm. And so you've basically, obviously, you're based in Vancouver, which is obviously within shouting distance of D-Wave, who is arguably one of the most publicly sort of high-profile sort of quantum companies, at least in this private sector. But when you sort of came into this, obviously the technology itself was a long, long way away from development. The idea of a digital quantum computer, the idea of this technology sort of coming into existence in terms of building up a startup and coming into this sphere that's not backed by government grants, is not backed by university grants or anything like this. What sort of gave you and your other co-founders the idea that this could be a viable option, rather than hooking yourselves up with defense contractors or universities?
Right. Well, there's kind of a long story there, but I guess we've got a couple minutes, so maybe I'll go into part of it,
Yeah, no,
and
it'd be great.
hopefully you can interrupt me as interesting bits need to be interjected. But I was at the University of Waterloo starting in 1999, and if I'm not mistaken, I think that was also the founding year of D-Wave Systems. And so they made a bit of a splash when they first came out, because I think at the point in time when they announced that they were going to start existing as an entity, the general wisdom was that quantum computers were, people say perpetually 20 years out, but I think people thought that they were more sort of 30 to 50 to 100 years out at that point. And that there just wasn't a lot of activity outside of the theoretical realm in this. And so that certainly was on my radar. But it wasn't until about 10 years later, in 2010, I was at Singularity University's graduate studies program at Moffett Field down at the NASA Ames Research Center outside of Mountain View, California.
Sorry, just to clarify, Singularities University. I've never heard of this.
Oh, right. Yeah, it's so they're called Singularity University, although they've just gone through a rebranding this week, and they've sort of always colloquially been known as SU. The idea is this is an organization that was started by Peter Diamandis and Ray Kurzweil in order to study exponentially advancing technologies.
Okay.
It's actually kind of an interesting part of the story, because although there's a lot of stuff that they talk about, I would say that the main message that I took away from that program was that successful businesses in technology are the ones that have started companies in order to take advantage of the technologies that would exist as that company hits its peak, as opposed to building for the things that have been exciting over the last few years. And so that really stuck with me. And not only that, but we had a number of lectures from people in industry. And one of the people who came and gave one of the talks for us was the co-founder and I believe CTO at the time of D-Wave Systems, who's a gentleman whose name is Geordie Rose. And so Geordie gave us a brief introduction to what they were trying to do. At that point in time, they had already committed to an initial release of the annealing-based processors. And so being able to sort of tell a bunch of reasonably intelligent, but essentially zero education in quantum information theory students a little bit about the difference between the quantum gate model and the quantum annealing model. Obviously, this had to be at a fairly high level, but it was intriguing, and it's something that stuck with me. And so as I left that organization, or sorry, the program that I was in there, there was an opportunity to get together with a couple of my friends a few years down the road, and we decided that we wanted to put together a little investment club, and we called it Minor Capital. And the idea was that there were a number of interesting things happening in Canada and specifically in British Columbia that we thought would be really interesting to learn more about, that we wanted to support the existence of, and that we thought would be good businesses. And these were different types of small startups doing things like synthetic biology, artificial intelligence, nanotech, robotics. And two of the most interesting ones that we saw were a little bit more like deep science technology. One of them, General Fusion, also sort of just down the block from us here in Vancouver. And so they're based out in Burnaby trying to build a fusion reactor. And they're using something called magnetized target fusion. But the other one that was on our radar was, of course, D-Wave Systems. And so we had this great opportunity to learn a little bit more about what D-Wave was doing as they were going through their fundraising round. And so, part of what you do when you're fundraising is tell the story of your company and allow people to ask the questions. And what we realized was that with something like this happening in our backyard, and with so much sort of, I would say, conflicting information in the media about what was happening with this company, we couldn't just sit by and hear about this secondhand when there was an opportunity to dig in, to get to know the people who are making this happen, and really to get to experiment a little bit with the machines. And so that was our first foray into the world of quantum computing seriously, was as a small minority investor in D-Wave systems.
So, so basically, you guys sort of handle a lot of the. I mean, feel free to talk about it any way you want to, but you guys handle a lot of the software side coming out of D-Wave, right? So your primary model is quantum annealing.
Right. So I would say that right now, because of the fact that D-Wave is the only company making commercially available quantum computers,
Sure.
In some ways, we're just basically working on whatever quantum hardware they're producing. And of course, they're right now committed to an annealing model for at least the next foreseeable future. And so that's been, something that we've got a lot of experience in. Of course, many of the people that we have working here have done their masters and their PhDs in either topological models of quantum computing or traditional gate models, or just abstract mathematics. And so we're really interested in looking to build the foundation of what we think the quantum computing industry will require over the long term. And so we've started out in annealing, but we're in no way committed to annealing as the only thing that we'll explore. And actually, I don't think that there's any organizations out there that are sort of dedicated to any one model. I think we're all a little bit more pragmatic than many of the reports that you've seen might suggest. And my guess is that really everyone's saying, what's the coolest thing that we can build today? Let's build that, learn from that, and that'll help us answer the question tomorrow of what's the coolest thing we can build tomorrow.
No, I mean this is certainly an interesting question that I wanted to ask, is to try to understand this sort of organizational relationship in terms of obviously what you guys want to do, and certainly the quantum software companies that I've spoken to, whether it's you guys or QBranch or QCware or Cambridge Quantum, they certainly understand the idea that this is going to progress into gate-based models, topological models, the kind of hardware that is being demonstrated by various groups worldwide. In terms of what you guys are currently doing now, is it sort of, I don't want to get into too much, are you partnering into D-Wave to a certain extent that you're responsible for developing software components that D-Wave is going to use in their systems? Or are you sort of more independent and you're just sort of partnering with D-Wave to play around and see what can be done?
Yeah, I would say more the latter, in that, so, sort of continuing a little bit with the narrative that I had just gone into, through that process of the initial investment, we got to go through a good amount of diligence, understand what was happening within the organization and what their technology was all about. And that allowed us, I think, to really have a much better understanding of the trajectory of the industry, and to understand a little bit more what the motivations and goals of D-Wave was in the short term. It also allowed us to have enough of a foundation of information in order to have a better view of what groups like Google and Microsoft and IBM were up to as well. And so really what we started to do in the back of a napkin was to extrapolate out the power of these machines and to look at when we thought there was going to be the first possible commercial quantum computer that would actually be useful on a price performance basis. And we really thought that that was probably going to hit sometime around the end of 2016 or beginning of 2017. So our projections were that it would be somewhere around now. And what we wanted to do was to be able to build an organization that would be competent at developing these tools and software, to have a good understanding of the space, and that would be kind of fully formed by the time that we arrived at this moment in time. And that's taken us about 3 years. So the reason that we founded this organization back in 2013 wasn't that we thought that quantum computers would be a functional and useful way to get tasks done at an industrial scale in 2013. We more thought that we would need to have the experience and the hands-on time with the processors, all the learning and the research in order to be able to basically start with this technology at the point when it was ready to launch. And so I suppose that throughout that whole period, we've had a great opportunity to get to know the team at D-Wave, to get to understand their motivations and to really know them on a personal level. That's helped us understand a little bit of what they're trying to accomplish and what they want to make available. And it's allowed us to really pace our organization and to prepare for the different releases that they have. But we're independent organizations, although my co-founder Landon and I, through our little group, Minor Capital, own a very small amount of D-Wave, and D-Wave has granted us access to their machine, and so we've got a nice relationship there. But all in all, we're separate organizations who are really just working in parallel. They're trying to build the best hardware that they possibly can, and we're trying to connect that hardware to useful industry problems in order to sort of motivate the uptake of that hardware. Well, so the way I would think about it in short is more like, if we are successful at being able to develop software that's compatible with some form of near-term quantum computer that solves a really intense problem that has a high dollar value attached to it, then that's great motivation to really continue that development. And of course, there's some things that the machines that exist today are already capable of doing, and we're working hard to exploit that and to understand really to what scale these machines are capable in their current form.
Well, so I suppose this is something interesting that I want to ask. Certainly, in terms of students and postdocs and people who are educated in this field, who may find the academic pursuit of quantum computing a little bit too demanding, a little bit too. There's quite a big hurdle in order to make a career out of this in the academic sector. How, when you start something up like this, whether it's 1QBit or something like Rigetti or these other sort of private sector players, considering that everyone expects such a long development time, how do you market this stuff to VCs? How do you say that this is going to have a return that isn't measured in decades?
Right. Well, I think that the first thing is you have to believe that that's the case. So I don't think that we would have started this organization if we believed that we wouldn't be able to do anything useful for decades. That being said, when we were first starting out, we were definitely not looking at the typical VC, trajectory, and we knew that this was an organization that was going to take at least a couple of years to really get up and going. And so because of that, instead of sort of courting the traditional venture capital groups, instead we found organizations that we thought would be impacted either positively or negatively by the development of quantum computers, to be able to explain the situation as we saw it to them, and to be able to sort of connect the dots for how this technology, both the hardware and the software, would be relevant to their industry. And basically, it was finding a number of people who were aligned in terms of their understanding of how a technology like this could impact, say, financial markets, and then going on sort of an experience and a journey with them in order to explore what types of specific applications would be relevant to their organization, to understand how the specific strengths of the quantum annealers, for example, would be able to do the sorts of things that are the biggest computational bottlenecks within the industries that we were partnering with. And all of that, I think, was just sort of a slightly different process than what one would do if they were going to, go and fund an app company for, iPhone or something. It was just a slightly different path. But on the other hand, it means that what we did find were organizations where there was really great alignment and sort of, I would say, visionary alignment in terms of understanding the realities of the hardware, understanding the capabilities and the promise of the software, and wanting to work together to make sure that that was aligned in a way that would be beneficial for everyone involved.
So in terms of how you sort of market yourselves and sort of the products you offer, I mean, is it you offer services and products now related to quantum, or is it sort of, you invest in us and this is something that's going to happen in such and such time frame?
Yeah, so I think that certainly that's a number of the ways that people have become investors have been from one qubit reaching out and basically having conversations around how we thought that this technology would be useful for a particular industry and looking to build what we consider to be essentially proof of concept software. So a great example would be if you wanted to do a portfolio optimization that would be utilizing quantum computers to optimize the S&P 500, which is a basket of 500 stocks. So if you had some rules that you used within your organization to choose the best 500 or the best out of those 500, then that might be the problem that's brought to us. And we might say, all right, well, given the current state of the quantum annealing hardware, if you want to see this software actually run on a hardware platform, we're going to need to scale this back to just working with the Dow Jones Industrial Average, for example, which is a 30 stock group. And so what we can do is we can write software that does the same process for 30 stocks or 500 stocks or 5 million stocks, but that's only capable of running on a machine with the same number of qubits, say, as there are stocks that you want to be choosing from. And so I guess basically at that point it comes down to demonstrating the fact that this hardware is capable of addressing exactly the sort of problems that exist within that industry and enabling different types of software applications than what are traditionally explored due to some limits on the complexity that classical machines are able to deal with. And in the end, after one of these proof of concepts, what comes out the back end isn't that a large financial institution is now using quantum computers in order to do all their optimization. It's that now these large organizations have an exact understanding of how this type of technology can influence and shape their industry. And so at that point, it's easy for us to move into more of a pilot stage project, but it's also easy for them to understand the process and the progress that's been made in the industry. And that's how we've actually come across a number of our investors, is by walking down that path of sort of the proof of concept and the educational component. And then it's all about just sort of extrapolating out when you think the power necessary in order to deal with industrial problems will be coming online from any of the large producers out there, including D-Wave.
Coming from my perspective, from an academic point of view, we're always trying to convince governments, we're always trying to convince academic institutions to fund us. In terms of what you guys are looking for, in terms of what you're sort of selling to the private sector and what the private sector is interested in. A lot of the times when I have academic discussions with people, it's sort of, what is commercializable? I mean, we think of things in digital quantum computing like Shor's algorithm or Grover's algorithm that have sort of obvious relevance if we could actually get them to work. But in terms of what the private sector is talking about, what do they want? What are they approaching you to talk about? What are they hoping to get out of this?
Yeah, well, the first thing that I think people really want to do is to have a better understanding of what quantum computing is, what it will be, what the uncertainties are along the way, what the strengths of the near-term quantum computers are versus the strengths of the more distant but more powerful machines that we have come to believe are inevitable. I think that the first thing that people really want from the private sector is a much better understanding of why this technology matters, why there's a bunch of buzz around it right now, and how it's going to impact them specifically.
So, I mean, people, especially in Canada, you talk to people at the University of Waterloo, Perimeter, places like that, especially in the space of quantum key distribution, they really are trying to target the private sector and saying, this is what you need, this is what you want, and get them involved and get them investing. From your perspective at One Qubit and trying to approach these, financial organizations or other organizations, are they still really they're still I'll put my toe in the pond and figure out the temperature yet. I'm really not yet convinced. I don't understand this enough. So maybe I'll throw a couple of $100,000 here, a couple of $100,000 there, but we're going to hold off at this point.
Yeah, I mean, if I met someone who didn't have a deep understanding of that industry and who had a different approach than the one that you just described, I would be confused because that's such a rational approach. I think that if you don't understand something and if you believe that there might be something interesting there, then dipping your toe in before jumping in is just a rational thing to do. And so what we're trying to do is to have those initial conversations to make sure that their first interactions with someone in this industry is really a very upfront conversation about what's possible today and what's not possible today, and to chart a course through the next sort of decade of development showing how these things that are very much right now either kind of bleeding edge technology in industry or things that are still in research labs have the capability of coming in and really changing what's possible within an entire industry. And so I think that really that needs to be the first step of the conversation, because you want someone who's going to be a good partner for your organization's development. And a good partner is an informed partner who understands their problems and who's relying on you to bring in some of the capabilities of the technology. And by utilizing that domain-specific knowledge related to quantum computers and the domain-specific knowledge of your client, you have an opportunity to really take a very interesting perspective where you can survey the landscape and say, all right, we believe that quantum computers of, say, the annealing type are going to reach a particular scale, a particular density, a particular layer of or level of, say, I guess you could say precision, and there will be a certain level of noise tolerance that they have, and to be able to really understand exactly what that means in terms of the caliber of answers that you can get and the types of problems that you can pursue, and to use that as sort of the starting ground for developing a strategy. And I think it's especially interesting. You mentioned something about the timelines and the way that these things are viewed. There's certainly been a lot of, I would say, criticism of the traditional venture capital industry, in that many people think that, the real heavy lifting of developing important new technologies hasn't been supported quite as widely as some of the more trivial applications. And to a certain degree, that's true. But there have always been people willing to invest in something that is going to be really revolutionary. And I think that pretty much anyone in this industry is working in this industry because they believe that there is such a capability for a real revolution in terms of computing. And what we would like to be able to do is to help everyone understand what that really means specifically to the work that they're doing. And I think that most people have a reasonable amount of comfort for a large organization, which, say, has been around for a couple hundred years, to think about the next 5 years as being not an unreasonable amount of foresight to use when thinking about something that could be as disruptive as quantum computing is. So I guess in short, what I would say is that, yes, there are some groups for whom looking longer than 18 months out is long-term thinking, but there's also a large number of organizations, certainly governments and academic institutions, for whom 5 years isn't that long a period of time. And if something radical will happen in 5 years, then the right time to be thinking about it is now. And at 1QBit, we're convinced that very interesting things will be happening well inside 5 years within this industry.
So you think that certainly you guys are focused on software. You're not looking at hardware.
That's right.
Do you think that there is enough investment and enough going on outside of 1QBit to help support this?
Well, if by enough you mean enough for this to be a viable business model, then absolutely. I mean, we're convinced that there's some amazing work that's happening at D-Wave, and I love seeing how D-Wave's constantly using the new information that they're getting from utilizing their current processors, really sort of what I think of as the typical Silicon Valley approach of build the best thing that you can, put it through its paces, learn from its weaknesses in order to build the next thing and to iterate quickly and to continue progressing. But also, I mean, I'm so impressed with the work that's happening at Microsoft right now. I think it's not on a lot of people's radar, but some of the large Chinese organizations, specifically including Tencent and Alibaba, are doing some great research here. And of course, there's all of the investment that's happening from governments, not to mention I think the 1 billion euro investment that's been announced within the last year in Europe is very exciting. Before that, we had a couple £100 million committed by the UK government. And even here in Canada, there's been a number of reasonably significant investments in university infrastructure that really is going to be helping pave the way for some of these technologies. So there's certainly a lot of investment that's happening and a lot of, I think, very intelligent, very well-funded people committed to being able to build these things. But to put that into perspective, it's always interesting to look at, the $1 trillion+ that's been put into the traditional semiconductor industry, and you realize that actually $1 billion isn't that much. So I think that investment's going to ramp up dramatically from here, but we're definitely getting the types of funding that's necessary for a new hardware ecosystem to come off the ground.
Yeah, no, I certainly agree. I mean, in the context of the silicon industry, the amount of money that's being invested into quantum computing is pretty minuscule. But in terms of 1QBit, I mean, you guys obviously, I imagine, are going to want to expand and adapt to whatever technological developments are going to happen. Annealing is obviously the first step, whether it's the D-Wave system or these sort of classical, not exclusively quantum systems, but based on sort of quantum particles of light. There's a recent science paper this year coming out of Japan for the Ising system developed in collaboration with Stanford. But where do you see you guys moving in the future? I mean, you've now got Google that's invested heavily into a fully fledged digital quantum computer. You've got IBM doing the same thing. As you mentioned, this €1 billion investment with the Europeans, the quantum hubs in the UK, Delft, various other people that are really pushing ahead with these sort of digital models. 1QBit, I imagine you're going to try to expand and push forward into the software side of this to try and help either support or at least market this stuff, moving away from sort of the annealing side and into the hopefully full-fledged digital quantum computers that we've all been trying so hard to build.
Yeah, so I would say I'm not so interested in moving away from the annealing side. I'm just interested in basically including all the other models as they come online. And what I'd love to be able to do is, as each new generation of hardware comes out, to understand how this is complementary or disruptive to the previous generations. I could easily imagine a future where there is one type of quantum computer that is generally understood to be superior to all other methods. But I could also just as easily imagine there being a number of different types of machines that do a great job at different types of problems. But to sort of think about how we're framing it here at 1QBit and how at least I personally think about this, I'm much more interested in having a very firm understanding of the types of problems, and I'm talking about very specific problems within a number of different and unrelated industries that require this type of computing, and looking at it really in order to say, what types of machines, what are the capabilities of the machines that are necessary in order to really push the envelope and to be able to take a big step forward in terms of what's possible within these industries, and to work to make sure that the hardware that's being produced and the software that's necessary to connect that hardware into industry is going in the right direction, so that we don't end up building something because it's really cool to build in a lab. And by we, I mean the industry at this point. I think it's really important making sure that this isn't a technology in search of a solution. This is a bunch of real problems that can be solved with a radical different type of computing, and to work to make sure that that new type of computing is going to be relevant to the industry that's going to need to support it.
I mean, do you guys? I mean, when you approach sort of private sector, other organisations, whether it's the financial industry, whoever, do you advocate for certain models? Do you sort of say, well, this is where we think it's going to go. This is where we think the best technology is going to be in 10, 20 years, or do you really sort of play it by ear of what is actually available?
Right. Well, I can only speak for myself, but I feel like what's made our organization welcome within some of these larger businesses is the fact that we say what we really believe, and we're comfortable updating those beliefs as new information comes in. So, if I know that there's a group that might be very attached to the idea of gate model systems. And so for them, anything but gate model systems are garbage. And until gate model systems come out, there's no use talking about quantum computers, for example. I would never want to take an approach like that, because I think that there's a number of very interesting things that can come out of analog models, or specifically the annealing machines that exist today. And I wouldn't want to be seen as just a cheerleader for a particular technology. I want to be seen as somebody who's going to pragmatically select the best method to solve a problem, and to solve that problem to the best of our ability, and to do it for the most efficient way, both in terms of compute time and in terms of dollar resources. So of course, whatever technology comes out that changes those dynamics, that would change our opinion about how to best solve these things. I think that you don't really get a lot of benefit from just sticking your head in one direction and saying everything that is gate model we're for, and anything that's annealing we're against, or vice versa, or whatever. So I guess, yeah, we're pretty pragmatic, and we're pretty open to understanding all of the developments that are coming. And of course, what we're trying to do is to make sure that our own, we have a software development kit that we've been putting together. We're looking at a microservices infrastructure that will start to be able to offer the types of solutions that are relevant to these industry problems that we've been bumping up against. And what we use to power those tools will be the best available hardware that exists. And I think it's by taking that perspective of saying, in order for anything to be valuable, it needs to be able to solve these valuable problems, and then basically marking or grading quantum hardware based on its capability of pushing forward these new types of solutions. That's probably going to lead us in a direction that's much more industry friendly than pursuing something because it's interesting in a lab context. So if there's anything that really comes from being more of a private enterprise as opposed to a pure research project, we do a lot of research, we do a lot of sort of fundamental work, but we do it in service of being able to advance the interests of people who have real problems that they need to be solved.
Well, so I suppose the related question that I would have is, do you see one qubit as sort of a services model, or do you see it as an advisory model as well as a services model? If a client comes to you and says, we want your opinions, you guys are experts in quantum computing, what is the best models to work from? Or do you just sort of, the client does its own research and says, look, we want to focus on this, and you guys are going to provide services in support of this?
Yeah, so I would say that, especially because it's so early within this industry, customer education is certainly something that it's not just a part of our business model, it's a necessary part of progressing this industry. So we're always interested in being able to share our understanding of this industry and to be able to help people to understand how this technology will be rolled out, what it looks like, what it does. And so, we don't shy away from that, but it's also over the longer term of our business, we see ourselves as basically providing quantum services and quantum software. I think that, it's very much in line with my current thinking that quantum computing power will be provided through the cloud. I think that we believe that a lot of the software is going to be software that operates either in a browser or with a remote connection to a quantum machine. And so a lot of what we're really trying to do is to help people understand that this is going to be a utility. They are going to pay for quantum functionality or basically quantum processor time, and that they can adapt their current systems in order to make use of future quantum computing by finding the crux of their problems that are really compatible with one or more types of quantum power and the quantum processing power that we believe will be coming online. So I think it needs to start with a conversation to just orient within the or the industry in order to understand what the strengths and weaknesses are. But it needs to push further than that and really be able to demonstrate that this technology is applicable within that industry.
So, I mean, as you said, you guys got started in 2013-ish, around that time, and
That's right.
I've seen it, at least from my own experience. I've been involved in this now for 10, 12 years now. Things have really exploded in the last 12 months, or the last 12 to 24 months. I mean, have you seen it from your side as well? I mean, how hard was it in the beginning compared to what it's like now, where it seems like every day you see Google alerts, quantum this, quantum that?
Yeah, I mean, I say that your experience is very closely aligned with ours, and that it's interesting because, as you note, all of this has really started probably in the last 24 months and accelerated into, almost a different beast in the last year or so. So we started a company when people were sort of like, I don't know that quantum computers will ever be successful or real. Now the conversation has really shifted to, I think that the current machines are probably not suitable for doing things at an industrial scale, but it's inevitable that quantum computing is going to be this transformative force that's going to come and really disrupt this industry. And that's a pretty huge change for such a short period of time. And it's certainly exactly the change in attitude that we believed would happen. The reason we believed it would happen is because it was the exact shift in attitudes that we were able to experience by getting really deep into the quantum hardware industry over sort of the last 5 or 6 years. And I think that we just, because we were really close to the ground there, had the opportunity to go through this process just a little bit earlier than everyone else. And, for us, we said, wow, this is going to be as apparent to everyone else as it is to us now. We need to do some hard work to prepare for this moment. And we just did exactly that. We found some people who were already on board with the idea that quantum computing was going to be useful within this time frame that you just alluded to. Mm-hmm. And mm-hmm. one of the nice things was all along the way, we've been seeing everything from press coverage to scientific papers to, reports and releases from large companies. All of this has been picking up velocity. The types of claims that are being made are more and more exciting. And the conversation around this technology has really moved from very hypothetical, sort of lab-based physics discussions to much more practical operations research type questions. And all of that, I think, is really just part of this maturing and becoming much less of a physics problem and becoming much more of an engineering problem. And soon, I think we're going to see it really as just a more traditional hardware play.
Yeah, no, I agree. So, in terms of the things that have happened over the last 12 to 18 months, um, I mean, what's the thing that's most excited you in terms of quantum as a whole? What's the thing that's really, I want to be a part of this, and this is where it's at.
Yeah, so I would say that one of the biggest things has been um, D-Wave releasing their 1,000 qubit processor was really exciting for us because that's enough qubits, even despite the Chimera architecture that they utilize, which means that you don't have the ability for most of our industrial problems to utilize the full number of qubits. We have a distinction that we make between the physical qubits and the logical qubits. But we can get enough logical qubits out of this system in order to be able to do some really interesting stuff that demonstrates the applicability of annealing hardware to exactly the sorts of industry problems that we've been focused on. So I found that to be really exciting. I think, like many people, I was also really encouraged by the work that that Google has done, and the reports that they've been putting out related to their use of hybrid quantum classical approach for error correction. I think that was very exciting and in my mind really advanced the industry in sort of one big jump when they put that out. And then the other thing.
Sorry, you mean which paper are you talking? Are you talking about the one in December 2015 or?
Yeah, I think that they've had a number of releases. Some of them have just been kind of posts to their Google Plus page. But
this is Harmut or is this John Martinez?
I've been excited by both of the things that they've been working on. Although I think that the work where it was the 10 qubit system with digital error correction, I believe that came out of John Martinez's group. But certainly, the way that I understand that is essentially that Google is committed to exploring a number of different avenues and that they're also pragmatically pursuing a number of different paths. So we wish them the best of luck. Of course, all that we're interested in is the best possible hardware.
Sure.
Yeah. And then finally, I would say that when I first heard about the work that Microsoft was doing, it was described to me as something along the lines of, they're trying to build this really robust type of qubit that's not going to suffer from all of the error correction problems that the rest of the approaches look like they'll be taking. And they just need to achieve a few impossible miracles, and then they'll be there. And, it was something where...
That's a reasonable summary of it.
Right, yeah. So I was sort of... My approach or my orientation toward their work was super interesting, super academic, but not putting a lot of stock in it. And I've started to come around to believe that the approach that they are pursuing might end up being one of the most interesting things to ever happen in this industry. So I wish them the best of luck with their work. I think that they've made a number of really exciting breakthroughs, and I look forward to hearing all of the public announcements about what they've managed to achieve, and to ideally to see them be able to move into more of a commercialization stage for their work as well.
Yeah, no, Microsoft's doing quite a good job at the moment. I'm not entirely aligned with their choice of topological architectures, but I'm very likely to be wrong. So we're sort of buffing up against our sort of 45, 50 minutes that I like to try to keep these podcasts at. So last thing I always like to invite people is to plug anything. What's happening? Is there anything you want people to know about? Job opportunities, investment opportunities, anything you think is quite cool that's happening in Canada and with 1QBit?
Yeah, so I guess I would be offside of my nation's interests, not to mention the fact that Canada's really got some of the coolest stuff that I've seen in quantum computing has been coming out of really our own backyard. And there's a lot of great stuff that's happening sort of out of the ecosystem related to the University of Waterloo, especially on the hardware side. There's a lot of great software and hardware stuff that's happening here on the West Coast. The University of British Columbia has some amazing programs that are starting to graduate some of the best and most interesting people that I've met in this field. And I just couldn't be happier to be based in Canada with this technology. It's, we're a small nation compared to many others. And to see us having such a great, I guess, head start within this industry is really encouraging. Something that I'd love to be able to plug from 1QBit is that one of the things that we think this industry really needs in order to be able to push forward more velocity is more people understanding how coding with these machines, software with these machines, how all of this really works and what it looks like. And so we've been putting a lot of effort into building a software development kit that we use internally to build all of the software that we're producing. And we're going to be making that available to the public. So you can go to 1qubit.com right now. And in our product section, we actually have some online notebooks that allow you to dig into the Python version of our SDK and actually to build compatible or quantum compatible software that works with quantum annealing processors using some very high level techniques, but also sort of drilling in. And we're going to be making this available to everyone else in the world over the next couple of months, both in C++ and in Python, so that people get a much better sense of what it's really like in order to code in a higher level with these types of machines, but also to be able to dig in and to really understand what's happening underneath the hood. So for anyone who's interested in digging in, if you go to 1qubit.com, there's some stuff that's there already, and we're going to just continue rolling out more and more interesting tools that allow everybody to get their hands on this stuff.
Well, yes, definitely. I mean, I will link to all of this stuff in the podcast feeds and everything, and certainly anyone who's listening to this, I would definitely encourage everyone to go check this stuff out. So thank you again, Andrew, for taking time out of your very, very busy day to have a bit of a chat about this. And it's great to hear sort of the private sector side viewpoint on all of this stuff. So thanks again.
Yeah, thanks so much for having me, and thanks for bringing more and more listeners into this world. I think what you're doing is a really great service for this industry, and we'd love to be of assistance any way we can. So I hope this isn't our last conversation.
No, I very much doubt it is. So thanks again, and thanks everyone for tuning in. Definitely this time it's going to be offline, whether it's on YouTube or any of our other accounts. I would like to say our next episode is going to be with Nathan Wiebe from Microsoft Research. That will be uploaded sometime later this week. This episode will hopefully be uploaded as soon as possible, but you'll see from our feeds when it is. So as normal, please log into our social media accounts, Twitter, Facebook, etc. for updates and when our next guests and our next interviews are. So thanks again, and thanks Andrew again. Cheers.
Thank you.